Good evening, friends. My name is Thomas, and I'm a grateful, recovering alcoholic. It's funny, I stand in the limelight for a living. I public speak for a living, and some nights you just get nervous, and you don't know why. But music like that sure helps set the tone, to bring everything back down to a level where I can understand. So I'm very, very grateful to the Crackpots for everything that they do for us in here. I was also thinking, as Pete was doing the announcements, that I'm very thankful for the youth in action. That's our future, the youth. And the fact that they're getting out there and doing the things that mean the most to this community is really a wonderful thing. That means that we're going in the right direction. I have a few youth at home that make me think sometimes we're going in the wrong direction. So I'm grateful to hear that they're out here and doing great things. It's funny, we put a lot of effort into these things so that we have something to come here and say to all you guys. And it's amazing when you're working with God and through God, how many times those conversations just land in the right place. When Pete came in this evening, one of the very first things that he said to me is, I want to sit and talk with you about reconciliation. I want to figure out what we do going forward. And I said, well, that's awesome. I've designed about the first 6 minutes where I'm talking about a course that I was in, and our lives always just seem to add up in that way, which also makes me think that we're headed in the right direction. As always, it's my pleasure to be here with you again this Sunday. And I'm really enjoying this weather outside, minus the smoke. It's almost like August, but I guarantee you it is early June, and we're still working on step 6. But before I get on with speaking to you about step 6 this evening, I want to tell you a little bit about my week. In this church, we constantly work on reconciliation. And as part of that work, we are always engaged in learning and interactions, trying to find the best way to move forward as two cultures. So this is why when I decided to go back to university for my bachelor's in social work, I also decided to take a minor in Indigenous studies. As a result of that decision, I was honored to spend 8 hours a day this week in a teepee with Blackfoot Elder Reg Crowshoe and our prof, Dr. Vicky Bouvier, who is a Michif woman. And the course that we took was all on oral systems. I bring it up here because it was a very spiritual week. He shared Blackfoot creation stories with us that were truly captivating. I just sat in awe and I listened. I could see where the creation stories ran side by side with passages that I've read in the Bible. But the biggest lesson I learned was that I would most likely need to spend the next 40 years in that teepee every day to have the amount of knowledge that Elder Reg Crowshoe carries and freely gives away to those that listen and ask questions. But there is a very important lesson that I did take away from there that I would like to share with you tonight, and that is this. I always thought the solution needed between Indigenous and non-Indigenous was this. I always thought that it was a coming together, so to speak. But the solution is actually this. This one looks much like the solution. It looks like we're coming together, but what it's doing is it's actually binding and it's creating more friction. The more we try and mesh these two systems together, the result is usually cultural confusion. The written and the oral system can both be used. They are both very powerful systems, but they must be used side by side in order for these two systems to run parallel. We must see them as equivalent to each other. They must be given that same amount of respect. If we give them the same amount of respect, then we can move forward in this way. This is the piece that we failed to do in 1880, was to allow both systems the same merit and respect. The oral system is something that I'm just personally learning to do now. And it is something that many of you may have not attempted yet. But this is why I'm proud to be a part of this church. We're a big part of the solution. I believe we are good at giving that respect to every culture in this church. And it is our hope that anyone and everyone from any spiritual background can feel welcome here. We hope that you can find connection to your higher power within the walls of this beautiful old church. But I think maybe the thing that I want you to take away the most from this piece on my course and reconciliation here this evening is this. Most of the time when two cultures are struggling to meet eye to eye, it is because one culture does not understand the other, or worse, both cultures do not understand each other at all. There is only one way to understand each other, and that is to ask questions and to attend events. Western society is not closed off to anyone, and neither is an Indigenous society. Both are much like this church. The doors are wide open to any and all who visit. Many events such as powwows are open to the public, and all you need is to have good intentions and a willingness to go into the unknown. So it's easy for us sitting here tonight to discount this information, to stay within our comfort zone, or to say things like, how is it my problem? Or why do I need to right the wrongs of something I did not personally do? My first answer is this. Residential schools are not as far in the past as you think. The last one closed in 96. This means that there are people my age that were forced to attend them. And I try not to look that old. I'm only 40. The second is the trauma that happened within these schools has multi-generational consequences, and I think that's the part that we need to understand. These consequences are so ingrained that it is still seen in babies that have not even been born yet. Many Indigenous youth today are trying to reconnect to their culture, trying to find their way back to the way things were before colonization, trying to find their spiritual practices again, to get a deeper connection with Creator, to learn the creation stories of their nation or tribe. But the problem lies in the Indigenous generations of people older than them that are unable to give the answers that they seek because they were so disconnected from their own culture and language for so long. So as a settler, my surname may not be directly related to those who opened the schools. And this church, specifically this church, may not be directly related to the operation of those schools. But I think that we can all agree that if the wounds of those schools are going to be healed, it is going to take all of us to do our part. So I hope you'll join me in trying to find a way of living in the parallel. We may not have the power individually to change the world, but if we each individually do our part to reconcile, we will find the world we live in will begin to change all by itself. So the same can be said for our recovery. When we first come into the rooms and start to draw a sober breath, it seems as if the whole world is a mess. But as we get down to doing the steps and doing that internal work on ourselves, our situations, our worlds, our lives, they drastically improve. They begin to change. And the more work we do on bettering ourselves, the better the world becomes. We just need to do our part and involve the God of our understanding. I was reading the 12 by 12 earlier this week, and on page 65 it says, Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. This is AA's way of stating that the best possible attitude that one can take in order to make a beginning on this lifetime job. This does not mean that we expect all of our character defects to be lifted out of us as the drive to drink was. A few of them may be, but with most of them, we shall have to be content with patient improvement. The words entirely ready underline the fact that we want to aim at the very best we know or can learn. When I read the line on patient improvement, I just chuckled to myself. I don't know if any of you here have ever tried to pray for patience. It usually results in many situations where you get to practice patience. Like God knows, we need repetition to learn. So you may experience the same type of situation with character defects. It may feel like they seem to multiply as you shed light on them. This can be very overwhelming at first. That's why in step 6, it speaks on being ready for God to remove them. This is too much work for us to do on our own. It takes God and a good sponsor to keep the light on those character defects. I have plenty of people in my life that call me on mine. This is a good thing. It helps all of us to stay accountable. But when we first tried to clean ourselves up with our own power and discipline, we kept ourselves agitated, confused, in denial, maybe even worn out, and we were almost in constant emotional pain. We were like the man who tore the scab off his arm every morning to see if the wound had healed. But it was in doing the sixth step that we see why we had become so exhausted. We had been trying to do God's part in the spiritual growth and healing process. In the programs, we were told that my part was being entirely ready, being ready to let God be the controller and life changer of ourselves and others. When we do that, we can see how God's power has released to flow through our lives and to clean them only when we quit trying to control the how and the when. He is used to this kind of power. And at first, when you hear that, it sounds like a call to complacency. That is until you get into step 7. This attitude of readiness to let God reach into our lives and uncover and remove the things that make us spiritually and emotionally sick is paradoxically the doorway to activate an effective change of specific lifelong habits and sins. But it means turning it over and relinquishing our need to control, even when it comes to our healing. The scripture that I found fitting here was Galatians 5, line 1. It says, "For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery." In this passage, Paul is pointing out that they were freed from the law. So be sure not to go back to it. In the context of our addiction, we can say that since we have been freed from our addictive behaviors through the grace of Christ, then we are not to be entangled again with the yoke of the bondage of our addiction. We are to stand fast, to abide in and remain in the liberty which Christ has given us and set us free. God leaves this choice up to us. We should always remember that the true choice then is not between the comfort of our addiction or not, but between liberty and bondage. By now, we should be wise enough to choose liberty. This is why the 6th and 7th steps are all about, to make this choice of liberty for our lives and to not be entangled again with that bondage. So the last thing I will speak to you about is the answer to the question that I get quite frequently. The question is this: it's pretty easy to be ready. Can I skip this step? Deciding to be ready isn't simple. It takes a significant change in your thought patterns and behaviors to become ready. Once you work through this step, you will find yourself noticeably different, including the way you think of yourself and of your future. That's because it takes a hard, determined decision to move forward in this step. It's all about commitment. It's about recognizing the defects in your character that have brought you to this point, and then making the conscious decision to step away from those attributes for good. Don't overlook this step or move too quickly through it. Expect it to be challenging. Ask yourself honestly, are you ready to finish this step, or are you ready to have your defects removed? These are two very different things. It takes patience to get this step and the step that follows thoroughly completed. So the reminder is this: these steps are not a race. They are more like a marathon. We pace ourselves, we watch our steps as we progress, and we settle in for the long haul. Character defects can be tough to work on. This is why we enlist God's help in this process, as I mentioned earlier. That is the importance of this step, to find the willingness to proceed through the help of our higher power. The result of working the first few steps came with the reward of stringing together some sobriety. The result of completing steps 6 and 7 for myself was happiness. Believe it or not, when I came into this program, anger was my natural state of mind. I spent my life, all my free time, being angry with anything and everything in the world. By working the remainder of these steps, I found happiness, true happiness. I'm able to be happy nowadays, regardless of outside circumstances. Do I get angry from time to time? Yes. But I have learned to react to my anger with respect instead of disrespect. What this does is enables me to approach and to solve a situation without coming in guns a-blazing. I treat my anger with respect by first sitting with it and finding out exactly what is making it appear. And then I try to address that situation calmly through conversation instead of letting it fester. When I react disrespectfully through anger, the emotion wins. I yell and scream, I stomp my feet, I throw a tantrum, and then I'm usually handing out apologies for my part of the situation. When you drank for as long as I did and get around to making amends, I've said I'm sorry and made things right enough times. Nowadays, I just try and make sure that I don't have to do that every single day. So these character defects, they are like checkpoints on a scavenger hunt. You must stop and work on them before you're giving the next clue to continue to the next defect. At the end is our prize. That prize is a happier life, safe, sober, free. This is the goal here. I want to be safe, I want to be sober, and I want to be free from my character defects so I can be the best version of myself. We accomplish this by simply doing the work that is laid out before us. Remember, friends, when you got sober, you agreed to change one thing, and that one thing was to change everything. So this is the path that leads to our new way of life. So don't give up before everything has a chance to be great. Just keep doing the work, and one day very soon, you'll be astonished at just how far your short journey has come.